This is Josh Friedman in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where I am on an overpass with a light rail train coming in right behind me. This is the fairly new, it's only been operating for a few years now, light rail. Some people refer to it as a tram, but I think the technical term is light rail. That is a major infrastructure development here in Addis Ababa. As is the case with other major infrastructure projects in the region, including in Ethiopia, which I will discuss or touch on very briefly. This light rail train light railway was financed primarily and constructed by the Chinese state financing and Chinese state engineering and construction created this new development here in Addis Ababa, which, as you can probably see with all the people getting out behind me, is extremely popular. It's a big lift to commuters who are been trying to avoid the crazy amounts of traffic that there are in this big and rapidly growing city. You can see there's constantly construction and unfinished buildings everywhere. I believe I'm at the Mexico Square station, which is I'm above one of the main squares in the city center. There right now are two lines. They intersect at Mescal Square, which is basically the main square in the center of Addis Ababa. And as I was saying, it's very popular. The tickets are cheap. They only go for like 2 to 6 birr, which is, I can't do it off the top of my head, but I think the average ticket is like a quarter or less than a quarter in US dollars or cents. And as you can see, the trains, they come and go. It's very efficient, although it's packed inside. I was shoved together with a bunch of people as I was trying to stand in there with too much stuff, a backpack, and trying to hold the camera. It was difficult, but anyway, it's so much more efficient than taking I would assume the buses around town. They've got various buses and mini buses, which you can see. There are the two lines right now, but there are plans to extend it and build a couple more lines, so it will probably be covering much of the city center and beyond. Actually, it already goes beyond. There's a north-south line and I think an east-west line, and so it's already providing efficient transport for some people. Not all, but many people are clearly using it. The project cost, I believe, $475 million, which isn't nearly as expensive as the actual railway that the Chinese built and financed that connects Addis Ababa to Djibouti, and specifically the Red Sea port of Djibouti, where much of Ethiopia's trade is coming and going. So the Chinese extended some major loans to Ethiopia for both of these projects, although primarily for the railway, which is also up and running now. That was the redesign and reconstruction of an old railway linking Addis Ababa and Djibouti. The new one cost, I believe it was about $4 billion, and already the Chinese have granted Ethiopia a little help with paying it back. The Chinese have allowed Ethiopia to restructure the debt. Seems like thus far Chinese have been quite friendly and lenient with Ethiopia. As I've already been saying, there are very strong ties between the two countries. I showed you the African Union headquarters that was built and funded by the Chinese. If you drive around town, you see stuff like Chinese Ethiopia friendship signs, Chinese Ethiopia street, China friendship square, China this, China that. Although when I talk to the locals, and granted I haven't spoken with that many about it, but it doesn't seem to me like the locals are as in love with China as maybe the politicians are and the government is. There's skepticism, as I was discussing in Kenya. There's been frustration over these infrastructure projects employing a lot of Chinese people as opposed to a lot of locals. Although I think the plan is for over time for locals to take over complete operation of both the light rail and the major railway linking Addis Ababa and Djibouti. But also I hear complaints about how, say, Chinese who are living and working here are not integrating at all. But I don't know. I mean, the ties are clearly strong, at least between the two governments, Ethiopia and China, that mean. And it's kind of hard to complain with some of these results. This light rail, I believe, is the first light rail that was constructed in Sub-Saharan Africa. It might, if you consider it a tram, I think it also is the first tram in Sub-Saharan Africa. And having traveled around East Africa, this is just so much, in terms of mass transit at least, this is so much more efficient than everything else I've seen in the region. Granted, I haven't been riding it so much, and I'm not going to and from work every day using this, but other than it being very crowded, it seems like it's a pretty great deal for the average Ethiopian commuter. Now, will all the loans be paid back in due course over this light rail and the railway? Who knows? Time will tell. I'll give you somewhat more of a view of the skyline. This is, I think, on the edge of the city center, although really this isn't a very centralized city. There's so much sprawl, and there are big clusters of big buildings all over the place. I know there was some talk about limiting the number of overpasses. I've driven alongside this light rail line, and for much of the way, at least on one of the lines, it's practically at street level. So, all right, I'm gonna wrap this up. I gotta get out of here. My time in Ethiopia, not just Addis Ababa, but Ethiopia, is short, unfortunately. I really want to come back here though, because there's so much more to see of this country, and this people think I'm filming them. I'm filming myself. There's so much more to see of the city, particularly this country. I haven't been outside of Addis Ababa, which has been frustrating, and I don't mean to focus solely on the relations between Ethiopia and China. There's obviously much more to this country than that, but at the moment they're very timely. They're major new infrastructure projects. There's all kinds of financing that's been given, and there are close ties politically. So I think it is important to share these developments in the Chinese and Ethiopian relations and Chinese and African relations, and it's been a theme for much of my travels here in East Africa, which unfortunately are coming to a close. But I'm gonna try to do one more video, maybe while I'm still in town, or maybe when I'm elsewhere, just wrapping up this trip, not just in Ethiopia, but across the East African region. I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to spend the past 4+ months traveling this region. I hope to come back, not just to monitor some of these new developments and the loans and the ties between China and these countries, but just because I really enjoyed my time. I've developed a liking for Ethiopia and some of the other countries in the region, albeit I must say that despite China pouring in all this money into infrastructure here, there's still some basic needs that could really be improved upon, like electricity. There are constant power outages here in Addis Ababa and I believe around Ethiopia. But enough of that for now. You got to look at somewhat of the city center, although I'll try to crop in some footage from the Mescal Square area. And you got to look at the light rail. So, Amasiganalo, thank you very much for joining me here in Ethiopia as well as across the East African region. And you know what? Here they say ciao. So I'll leave it at that. Ciao from Addis Ababa.